Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Let's talk about opioids. On one hand, they're a medical marvel, right? They can erase some of the most intense pain imaginable. But on the other hand, they're the fuel for one of the most devastating public health emergencies we've ever seen. So how is that possible? How can one thing be both a miracle and a menace? That's the paradox we're going to get into today. And that really is the central question. We're going to trace this story all the way from an ancient flower to the modern epidemic. We'll dive into the biology of what's actually happening inside the body during an overdose, and then we'll look at the incredible science behind the antidote that can literally pull someone back from the brink. By the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture of how we got here and what it's going to take to find a way out. All right, let's start with just one number to set the stage. 200%. That's how much opioid-related deaths shot up in the U.S. between the year 2000 and 2015. And get this, by 2009, more people were dying from prescription drugs, mostly opioids, than from car crashes. This wasn't just some gradual trend. This was a full-blown explosion. So to really understand how things got so out of hand, we've got to rewind the clock, way back. Because long before this crisis, before any pharmaceutical companies, the story of opioids started not in a lab, but with a simple, beautiful flower. Yup, the opium poppy. This one plant is the natural source of substances like morphine and codeine. We call those opiates because they come directly from opium. But you've probably heard the word opioid too. Well, that's a much bigger umbrella term for anything, natural or synthetic, that hits the same targets in our brain. And this has been a really, really long journey. I mean, look at this. We're talking medicinal use going back to 1500 BC. Then a huge leap in 1804 when morphine was first pulled from opium. By 1914, the US government was already seeing addiction issues and started to regulate it. And now we're in what experts call the third wave of this crisis, and it's been driven by incredibly powerful synthetics like fentanyl. Okay, so we've got the history down. But what is actually going on inside the body during an overdose? What makes it so incredibly deadly? Well, the answer is buried deep inside our own biology. You know, the best way to picture this is with a simple lock and key analogy. It makes so much sense. Our bodies are naturally equipped with these special locks called opioid receptors. An opioid molecule is like the perfect key. When that key finds its lock, it slides right in, turns, and kicks off a whole chain reaction. And this right here, this is the heart of that whole paradox we talked about. It all boils down to one specific lock, called the mu receptor. Activating it does two very different things. The mu1 pathway gives you the good stuff, that incredible pain relief, even a sense of euphoria. But activating the mu2 pathway, that's where the danger is. It leads to physical dependence, and most critically, it suppresses your body's fundamental drive to breathe. All of this leads to what clinicians call the opioid toxidrome. It's really just a clinical term for the classic trio of signs you see in an overdose. The person is unconscious, their pupils become tiny pinpoints, and their breathing slows way, way down, or even stops. And that last one, respiratory depression, that's the killer. The brain literally just forgets to tell the lungs to breathe. I mean, that sounds absolutely terrifying, right? It sounds unstoppable. But what if I told you there was a way to hit the brakes on an overdose? A way to literally stop it dead in its tracks? Well, there is, and its name is naloxone. This drug, which was actually developed way back in 1960, is a true lifesaver. It's a specific antidote designed for one single purpose: to reverse an opioid overdose. So let's go back to our lock and key. Naloxone works because it has a way stronger attraction to that opioid receptor, the lock, than the opioid does. So it essentially swoops in, violently kicks the opioid key out of the lock, and then jams itself in there, blocking any other opioids from getting in. The overdose is immediately halted. It's amazing. Now, this is super important because it's a point of confusion for a lot of people. You've got naloxone, and then you have its cousin, naltrexone. They sound similar, but they do very different jobs. Think of it like this. Naloxone is the emergency rescue tool. It works fast and wears off pretty quickly. Naltrexone is a long-term tool used to help people stay in recovery. You would never use naltrexone in emergency because it would trigger a horrible, prolonged withdrawal. So, when a first responder uses naloxone, what's the goal? You might think it's to wake the person up, right? But actually, no. Waking them up suddenly can cause a really severe withdrawal. The real goal, the only primary goal, is just to get them breathing again. You start with a low dose, you focus on ventilation, and then you have to watch them like a hawk because the naloxone can wear off before the opioid does, and they could slip right back into that overdose. Look, naloxone is nothing short of a miracle in an emergency situation. But saving a life is just the first step. That's not the end of the story. To actually turn the tide on this crisis, we need to think much, much bigger. Today's public health approach is really built on three main pillars. First, you've got prevention. That means being smarter about prescribing so we can stop addiction before it starts. Then there's harm reduction. That's all about getting tools like naloxone out into the community and educating people. And finally, and this is so important, there's treatment, providing access to effective therapies that help people manage opioid use disorder and get on the road to recovery. And that last piece, treatment, is absolutely everything. We can't just be in the business of reversing overdoses over and over again. This quote really says it all. If we want to prevent future deaths and help people actually get well, treating the underlying disorder has to be our #1 strategy. So, we've walked through the whole story, from an ancient plant to a modern crisis, from the biology of an overdose to the science that can fight back. Getting a handle on this complex story is a critical first step. But it leaves us with a pretty big question. What's the next step we all need to take?
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.